to the report. The chair of the committee, the Right Honourable Member for Romsey and Southampton North, has described the government's progress as glacial and its response as complacent, pointing out it's a missed opportunity to protect vast numbers of talented and experienced women from leaving the workforce. So will the Minister change tack and will she commit to finally acting on menopause and the workplace? And if she won't, will she commit to looking again at why devolving employment law to Scotland matters so much, so that we can do that work?
Mr. Speaker, what I would do is ask the Honourable Lady to read the Women's Health Strategy, and she will see that the menopause is a priority area within the Women's Health Strategy. What I would say is that the Select Committee has made recommendations which we have considered carefully, but there is no point in the government having a strategy if it's simply going to accept recommendations from elsewhere that don't conform to that. I think that the best thing would be for her to actually work with the government and to look at the good work that we're doing on tackling issues around the menopause.
Emma Hardy.
Question number 2. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tackling NHS waiting lists, including for gynaecology, is a priority for the government, which is why we're spending £8 billion on clearing our backlog, and why for gynae procedures specifically, the 90 surgical hubs which have opened, the 90 community diagnostic centres and the women's health hubs will all go to tackling gynaecology backlogs.
Emma Hardy.
Thank you, and I thank the Minister for her answer. Some vaginal mesh injured women have been left waiting 4 years for mesh removal, and I've highlighted before these women's concerns that the surgeons that they go to for mesh removal are only actually trained in implanting the mesh and not removing the mesh. These women fear that once again they're being used as test subjects. So when will mesh-injured women get the redress that was recommended by the Baroness Cumberledge's review, First Do No Harm?
Minister.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her work in this space, and I recognise that while we've set up 9 specialist mesh centres to tackle mesh removal, and we have seen a number of women come forward and receive their surgery, there are still a number on the waiting list. I'm meeting with some of the campaigners next week on mesh removal. We were at the Select Committee hearing just a few weeks ago, and I heard some of their concerns. So I recognise there's still more progress to make in this space.
We now come to Shadow Secretary on these slides.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. NHS England figures show that in October 2012, 15 women had been waiting over a year for gynaecological treatment. Can the Minister tell the House how many women had been waiting for that long in October last year?
Minister.
Well, as the Shadow Minister will know, there's a backlog of procedures in all 4 devolved nations of the United Kingdom for clinical reasons rather than political reasons. We have made huge progress in clearing the 2-year backlog, with the majority of those patients now having had their treatment. We're on track to meet the 18-month target in April, and will then be focusing on those who are waiting for a year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I regret that the Minister did not directly answer my question, perhaps because she is aware of the appalling scale of that backlog. 38,000 women, as of October last year, had been waiting over a year for treatment. That's 2,500 times more than 10 years ago. On top of that, now less than half of women are up to date with cervical screening in some areas. Do women suffering in pain now just have to accept long waiting times and low screening rates under the Conservatives?
Minister.
Well, isn't it sad that this is turning into a political football when there are clinical reasons why backlogs have accumulated over the 2 years? Perhaps the Shadow Minister will want to look at Wales, where Labour have been in charge for 20 years and where their performance is worse than in England.
Temmie.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Embrace report does show that women from Black, Asian and mixed ethnic groups do have worse outcomes when it comes to maternity outcomes, and that is why NHSE have published the Equity and Equality Guidelines for local maternity services, supported by £6.8 million worth of investment to focus on actions to reduce these disparities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, the government's own maternity task force pleaded with the government to provide better maternity care for migrant women. But yet, still 8 in 10 refugee and migrant women are still waiting more than 10 weeks to get their first antenatal care. And that is compounded by the fact that black women are still 4 times more likely to die in this country from childbirth. So Can the Minister let us know when the task force will finish their inquiry and when the government will start delivering better maternity care for women in this country?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for highlighting the work of the Maternity Disparities Task Force, which this government set up. I have been working with the co-chair, Professor Jacqueline Dunkley-Bent. Our next meeting is going to be focusing on some of the actions to tackle this. But I would encourage all members to, as from October last year, each local area produced their local maternity, equity and equality action plans, targeting specific communities within those areas to try and improve those outcomes. I would encourage all members to look at their local action plans, and if they have concerns that they won't meet those needs, please do come and see me. I'm very happy to work with members on this.
That's it.
Number 4, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll take questions 4 and 15 together. It was the Conservative government that introduced gender pay gap reporting in 2017, motivating employers to look at their pay data and improve workplace gender equality. And to accelerate progress, we are supporting legislation that enhances flexible working, extends redundancy protection for those on maternity leave. We're introducing carers leave, and we're strengthening the protections against harassment in the workplace.
I'm introducing Dessie.
Mr. Speaker, the gender pay gap amongst full-time employees was 8.3% in April 2022. That's sadly up from 7.7% in the previous year. Worse still, Labour analysis has uncovered that amongst black African women, the gender pay gap is an appalling 26% compared with the average male worker, and for Bangladeshi and Pakistani women, the figures are 28 and 31% respectively. So rather than just watch as the situation deteriorates, what urgent steps is the government taking to deal with these dreadful disparities?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't recognise any of the statistics that the Honourable Gentleman has raised. And with all due respect, I have seen all sorts of Labour analysis that misuses and abuses statistics to the point where we honestly can't take them seriously. If he does have evidence, real evidence, where he has identified things, I'm very, very keen for him to send it to the Equality Hub and we can analyse. But those figures do not represent anything that we have found across government.
Mr. Speaker, closing the gender pay gap would add £600 million to the UK's economy by 2025. Labour has a plan to do this by requiring large firms to publish gender pay gap plans, permitting equal pay comparisons and extending statutory maternity and paternity leave and strengthening protections for pregnant women. Will the government finally accept our proposals?
Secretary.
I'm afraid the government will not accept those proposals. Even the statement she's made where we're conflating equal pay and gender pay gap reporting, they're not the same thing. This is one of the areas that has quite a lot of nuance, and what I would say is that Labour needs to do a little bit more of its own homework.
Walker.
Would my right honourable friend agree? One of the most effective ways we can close the gender pay gap is to support women returning to work after pregnancy. And would she agree, therefore, to use her good offices to encourage cross-government work to improve the affordability and availability of childcare for young mothers?
I thank my right honourable friend for his question. I think this is something that we can agree on all sides of the House does need more support and more work. Childcare is one of the reasons why women do leave the workplace, and we're doing everything we can to support women to ensure that they have appropriate childcare arrangements in place.
Chloe Smith.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for bringing forward this Act and the important work she did in delivering it. And I'm assured that work continues across government to ensure departments named in the schedule of the Act are aware of their reporting duty. They will report on their use of BSL in their public communications at the end of the first reporting period, which is the 28th of June this year.
Chloe Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome that update. Will the advisory board also be on track ahead of that first statutory reporting timetable? And when will the statutory guidance be commenced? And furthermore, will my honourable friend, the Minister, commit that major public broadcasts by the government will be fully accessible?
Well, the Honourable Lady will be very pleased to know, my friend, that the first meeting of the departments who drive the Act forward is due to take place in mid-February. It's vital that the 20 departments listed on the schedule deliver the commitments, and the board will be the first dual-language one advising Her Majesty's government, demonstrating our commitment to the deaf community, and will form the vital guidance in the Act. And it will also rightly look at the major public broadcasts which my constituents and many of our constituents want to see and have asked for.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What discussions has the Minister had with our colleagues in the Government Communications Service about ensuring that BSL interpretation is provided for government announcements and media events, and the importance of not relying on written documents as an adjustment for deaf people?
Minister.
Yes, I thank the Honourable Lady for her interest. The British Sign Language Advisory Board, as I say, is being established to advise the government on that implementation. And amongst those people giving advice will be BSL signers. And the majority of the members of those deaf BSL users will have lived experience, and the point will be that they want those government communications to be accessible. I'm very proud at DWP we do have that accessibility in our job centres, and this needs to be for major government announcements as well.
Catherine West.
Please.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to a sustainable long-term approach to tackling poverty and supporting families on lower incomes. To help people progress, the DWP provides a range of support for anyone at any age or career stage and background to move forward and be better off, as well as one-to-one support with their work coach. Job seekers can access sector-based work academies, the Restart programme and the Work and Health programme.
Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Jesuit said, "Give me a child until he is 7 and I'll give you the man," meaning the impact in the under 7 years that we put into helping children will create a more just future. What urgent action will the government take to address deep poverty affecting 46% of black and minority families? Is there extra funding that can be given to schools and into our teaching to support the under 7-year-olds from black and minority ethnic communities?
Minister.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her point, and I think as an award-winning MP for focusing on disadvantaged groups, it's no doubt that she has interest in this area. The ethnic minority employment rate is at a record high, 70%, and we know that work is the best route out of poverty, and mentoring and support and being able to see those role models is absolutely key. And I can commit to continue to work across government with those disadvantaged groups to make sure that focus, as she says, is rightly there.
Minister Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend, the member for Hornsey, asked about deep poverty and minority children, so I'll ask the question again. Black, Asian and minority ethnic households are twice as likely to be in deep poverty and struggling to afford everyday basics such as food and energy. That's 46% of ethnic minority children living below the breadline. Is the Minister proud of her government's record, and will she answer the question that was put by my honourable member for Wood Green and Hornsey?
Well, I do refer the Honourable Lady to my previous answer, and we do know that work is the best route out of poverty and tackling those deep-rooted disadvantages. I recently joined a number 10 roundtable in terms of mentoring and support pipeline and helping people to understand what is holding people back. No one should be left behind because of their postcode and their background, and mentoring circles at DWP can make a real difference, particularly to young people who are looking to progress from that deep disadvantage.
Mr. Gibson.
Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Back again, Mr. Speaker. The primary causes of the gender pensions gap is due to the historic inequality of the labour market. This includes differences in working patterns and earnings for men and women. Now, this government has taken key steps such as the introduction of shared parental leave, mandatory gender pay gap reporting, and an effort, as we have heard already today, to tackle the root cause causes of this problem for women. And I know my honourable friend, the member for Sevenoaks, the Pensions Minister, is looking directly at this issue for women as well.
Tricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's bad enough that women born in the 1950s were robbed of their pensions. But more generally, the gender pension gap is significantly larger than the gender pay gap and applies to a significantly large proportion of women in the UK, with retired women more likely to be poorer and more likely to rely on pension credit, a problem that persists. Will the Minister urgently address this issue, or, like the injustice suffered by WASPy women, will her government just ignore women being poorer in retirement?
Well, I can assure the honourable lady we simply will not be doing that. We monitor the pension contributions and participation by gender and publish data regularly through our Workplace Participation and Saving Trends publication. And what I would say, our funding of returners programmes are key to this as well, in terms of supporting those, as she rightly says, who've taken time out from the labour market for caring responsibilities. And finally, pension sharing on divorce is an option that can help women, as she says, if marriage or civil partnership has broken down. But as I say, it is a focus for us all.
Go to Topicals, Cat Smith.
Mr Speaker, question number 1, thank you.
Secretary.
Mr Speaker, the Government will publish a draft bill setting out our approach to banning conversion practices. This will go for pre-legislative scrutiny in this parliamentary session. We are committed to protecting everyone at risk of these practices from harm, and we are clear that the legislation must not affect the ability of parents, teachers or counsellors to have open, exploratory and even challenging conversations with young people.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I ask the Secretary of State if she's had sight of the Health Select Committee's report into the Independent Medicines and Medical Devices review, and whether or not, particularly on point 53, what conversations she might be having with Treasury colleagues to support women seeking redress?
Secretary.
Mr Speaker, I thank the Health and Social Care Committee for their IMMDS follow-up report, and our sympathies remain with all those women who have been affected by sodium valproate. Patient safety is our top priority, and we're committed to improving how the system listens to people, which is why I've asked the Patient Safety Commissioner, Dr. Henrietta Hughes, to look into redress schemes. So I'm not committing to any specific next steps today, but the Minister for Women will provide an update in due course.
Bob Blackman.
Mr Speaker, does my honourable friend agree? Cheers from the other side, Mr Speaker. Does my honourable... Doesn't happen very often. Does my honourable friend agree with me that whether you live in Land's End or John O'Groats, it's important for every citizen to know their rights and those rights to be implemented on a clear and consistent basis so no one is discriminated against?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and the United Kingdom has some of the strongest equality legislation in the world, and rightly so, and we continue to ensure that all of those rights are protected. Under the Equality Act, any person who is subject to discrimination can personally take their case to court to seek a remedy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Despite the 11th hour response to my letter about HRT repayment certificates arriving in my inbox just an hour ago, there still appears to be some ambiguity about what the certificate will cover. In her letter, the Minister says the changes to the drug tariff are being finalised to add eligible items, but no indication as to whether this will cover all HRT products. So, for the benefit of women across the country, and as a matter of urgency, could the Minister please provide a comprehensive list of which products?
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady for her work in this space? I did respond to her letter last week as quickly as possible, and I'm glad she's received the response. I just want to confirm that from April, the HRT prepayment certificate will be available to women, £18.70 for a whole year, saving women hundreds of pounds on HRT prescriptions every year.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I am pleased that the Government is reinstating protection against third-party harassment in the workplace. But employers are frequently confused when they're confronted with conflicting views on sex and gender. Can my right honourable friend confirm that the Equality and Human Rights Commission will be publishing detailed guidance to explain how employers should be treating protected beliefs on sex-based rights?
Secretary.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. The government will be supporting the Equality and Human Rights Commission in developing a statutory code on workplace harassment. We'll be working closely on this. And the government is also preparing its own practical guidance for employers on preventing sexual harassment in the workplace, which should address the very issues which she's just raised.
Mr. Speaker, Citizens Advice report published in the last 2 weeks shows that 600,000 households were moved to prepayment meters. There are bound to be many people who are vulnerable and disabled who have been moved onto those prepayment meters in that time. Could you say what she's been doing to ensure that that practice ceases and to protect those people in the future?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising that issue, and I believe it's going to be discussed further between the Department for Bays and also with the support that we give at DWP. I'm very proud to be bringing forward the next stage of the Household Support Fund and the cost of living payments. And I would say to anybody who is concerned about making payments, contact their energy supplier, use the benefits calculator on .gov.uk, and also make sure they look at the support for the cost of living household support fund through their local authority.
Little Richards.
The group are reported to be committing, by the UN and others, atrocities atrocities including rape against women and girls in Ukraine on behalf of their Russian paymasters. So will the Secretary of State raise this with Cabinet colleagues and urge the government to prescribe the group as a terrorist organisation?
Mr. Speaker, the UK condemns Russia's use of Russian state proxies such as the Wagner Group in Ukraine and globally. And Wagner mercenaries operating in Ukraine in support of the Russian invasion, present in other conflict settings, including Mali and the Central African Republic, are continuing to bring us huge challenges. We are continuing to work with the Ukrainian government on tackling conflict-related sexual violence, including through UK expertise to support the investigations through the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group, and we will not stop to provide that support.
Final question, Nora Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The average cost of a full-time nursery place for a child under 2 when there's no government support costs around £14,000 a year, and much more in London. Can the Minister now get her government to put in the investment that's needed to fix the broken childcare system so that more mothers can return to work, particularly those who are single parents who struggle to return to work because of the lack of affordable childcare?
Secretary.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. This is, as I mentioned earlier, an issue that the government is working very, very hard on. And what I will do is raise this with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education, who can write to her and address those concerns more fully.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I'd like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We start with questions to Prime Minister Margaret Farrier.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, can I start by wishing everyone a happy Burns Night, especially to those celebrating in Scotland. And, Mr. Speaker, as we prepare to mark Holocaust Memorial Day, I'm sure the whole House will join me in paying tribute to the extraordinary courage of Britain's Holocaust survivors, including 94-year-old Eric Hirsch, who is with us here today. This government will legislate to build the Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre next to Parliament, so the testimonies of survivors like Eric will be heard at the heart of our democracy by every generation to come. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Shockingly, 1 in 6 women in the UK have experienced economic abuse. This is not just about money, but the restricting of access to other resources like food, housing or work. It's the lesser-known aspects of coercive control. It affects my constituents, the Prime Minister's constituents, and every member across this House. What plans does the Prime Minister have to review in detail government departments and policies, the way that government departments and policies can be exploited by abusers to ensure that these loopholes can be closed?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises an important point, and let me assure her that this government is committed to tackling violence against women and girls. That's why we passed the landmark Domestic Abuse Bill, introduced new offences, for example, coercion, coercive control, stalking and others, and will continue to do everything we can to ensure women and girls feel as safe as they deserve and rightly should be.
Marco Longe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I was disappointed that Dudley did not make the final cut in the latest Levelling Up funding round, I am, of course, pleased that we received the £25 million Towns deal, the brand new Duncan Edwards leisure facility, and a transport interchange project secured since my election in 2019. But our high street, Mr. Speaker, is on its knees. So will the Prime Minister meet with me and Dudley Council to discuss our levelling up bid and how we can ensure success in the next round?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a great advocate for his constituents. And I'm delighted that, thanks to his efforts, Dudley has received £25 million from the Towns Fund. I know there will be disappointment about the Levelling Up Fund, but all bids, including that made by Dudley Council, can receive feedback to strengthen their bid for future rounds of funding, and I would be very happy to meet him further to discuss.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week we will remember the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust and all those scarred by genocide since, as we mark Holocaust Memorial Day. We must all commit across this House to defeat prejudice and hatred wherever we may find it. To work for a better future, we must find light in the darkness. I could also join the Prime Minister in wishing everyone a happy Burns night. Mr. Speaker, Zara Alina was walking home from a night out with her friends when she was savagely attacked, assaulted and beaten to death. Zara was a brilliant young woman, a trainee lawyer with a bright future. Her killer is a violent, racist, woman-hating thug, not fit to walk the same streets. No. But that's precisely the problem. He was free to walk the same streets. Yeah. The inspectorate report into her case says that opportunities were missed by the probation service that could have prevented this attack and saved her life. Does the Prime Minister accept those findings?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this was a truly terrible crime. And as the Chief Inspector has found, the failings in this case, and indeed others, were serious and indeed unacceptable. In both of the cases that are in the public domain, these failures can be traced to failings in the initial risk assessment, and that's why immediate steps are being taken to address the serious issues raised.
Keir Starmer.
I'm glad he accepts those findings. The report also says that staffing vacancies and excessive workloads contributed to those fatal failures. And it makes absolutely clear this was not a one-off. As the report says, these are systemic issues in the probation service. They're clearly ministerial responsibilities. Does the Prime Minister accept those findings as well?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me outline for the honourable gentleman exactly what steps we are taking, and that's to ensure that mandatory training to improve risk assessments is being put in place. It's mandating checks with the police and children's services before a probation officer can recommend to the court that a convicted offender be given electronically monitored offence, and implementing new processes to guarantee the swift recall of offenders. And the action we are taking is already making a difference, as, for example, we see in the reduction of the number of electronically monitored curfews being given by the courts.
Yes, Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it was Barking, Dagenham and Havering that tragically and fatally let Zara down. But across the country, probation services are failing after a botched, then reversed privatisation, after a decade of underinvestment It's yet another vital public service on its knees after 13 years of Tory government. I spoke to Zara's family this morning. It's hard to convey to this House the agony that they've been through. They say that the government has blood on their hands over these failings. He's accepted the findings of the report. Does he also accept what Zara's family say?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my heart, of course, goes out to Zara's family. He mentioned accountability. The probation services has taken action where failings have been found and where that has been appropriate. And with regard to the overall service, because of the extra investment we're putting in, there's now £155 million a year being put into the probation service so that we can deliver better supervision of offenders. There's also been an increase in the number of senior probation officers. But one of the other things we must remember, Mr. Speaker, if we do want to increase the safety of women and girls out on our streets, that we need tough sentencing. And that's why this government passed the Police Crime and Sentencing Act, which the honourable gentleman opposite and his party opposed.
In light of the case of Zara, I really don't think the Prime Minister should be boasting about the protection that he's putting in place for women. And I'm not going to take lectures from him about that. Does the Prime Minister agree that any politician who seeks to avoid the taxes they owe in this country is not fit to be in charge of taxpayer money?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to make my position on this matter completely clear to the House. The issues in question occurred before I was Prime Minister. With regard to the appointment of the Minister without portfolio, the usual appointments process was followed. No issues were raised with me when he was appointed to his current role. And since I commented on this matter last week, more information has come forward. And that is why I have asked the independent adviser to look into the matter. Now, I obviously can't prejudge the outcome of that, but it is right that we fully investigate this matter and establish all the facts.
Mr. Speaker, he avoided the question. I think anybody watching would think it's fairly obvious that someone who seeks to avoid tax can't also be in charge of tax. Yet, for some reason, the Prime Minister can't bring himself to say that or even acknowledge the question. Now, last week, the Prime Minister told this House that the chair of the Tory party had addressed his tax affairs in full and there was nothing to add. This week, after days of public pressure, the Prime Minister now says there are serious questions to answer. What changed?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know he reads from these prepared sheets, but he should listen to what I actually say. Since I commented on this matter last week, more information, including a statement by the Minister without portfolio, has entered the public domain, which is why it's right that we do establish the facts. And Mr. Speaker, let me take a step back. Now, of course, the politically expedient thing to do would be for me to have said that this matter must have been resolved by Wednesday at noon. But I believe in proper due process. That's why I appointed an independent adviser, and that's why the independent adviser is doing his job. But the opposition can't have it both ways. The shadow leader, also his party chair, both urged me and the government to appoint an independent adviser. And now he objects to that independent adviser doing their job. It's simple political opportunism, and everyone can see through it.
Keir Starmer.
we all know why the Prime Minister was reluctant to ask his party chair questions about family finances and tax avoidance. but his failure to sack him, when the whole country can see what's going on, shows how hopelessly weak he is. A Prime Minister overseeing chaos, overwhelmed at every turn. He can't say when ambulances will get to heart attack victims again. He can't say when the prison system will keep streets safe again. He can't even deal with tax avoiders in his own cabinet. Is he starting to wonder if this job is just too big for him?
Mr. Speaker, the difference between him and me is that I stand by my values and my principles even when it is difficult. When I disagreed fundamentally with the previous Prime Minister, I resigned from the government. But for four long years, he sat next to the member for Islington North. When anti-Semitism ran rife, when his predecessor sided with our opponents. That's what's weak, Mr. Speaker. He has no principles and just petty politics.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For our most vulnerable children, school is often their principal place of safety as well as education. But as reported in my review of school exclusions for the government in 2019, the unacceptable and illegal use of off-rolling is still shutting a worrying number of children out of the classroom, out of learning and out of the protection they need from gangs, violence and domestic abuse. And whilst there has been some impressive and excellent work done by the Department of Education to address this terrible practice, what more can my right honourable friend do to ensure that we now permanently exclude off-rolling from our schools?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend raises an important issue, and the government is clear that off-rolling is unlawful and unacceptable in any form, and the Department for Education continues to work with Ofsted to tackle it. Where Ofsted finds it, it will always be addressed in the inspection report, and it could also lead to a school's leadership being judged inadequate.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Stephen.
Mr. Speaker, let me start by echoing the sentiments of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in relation to Holocaust Memorial Day. Truly horrific crimes that we must never forget and endeavour to ensure are never repeated. May I also send my heartfelt thoughts, and indeed I hope those of all across the Chamber, to the firefighter who's in serious condition in Edinburgh at this moment in time following the blaze in Edinburgh just a few days ago. Mr. Speaker, may I ask the Prime Minister, what advice would he have for individuals seeking to protect their personal finances? Should they seek out a future chair of the BBC to help secure an £800,000 loan? Should they set up a trust in Gibraltar and hope that HMRC simply don't notice? Or should they do as others have done and simply apply for non-dom status?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me share with the honourable gentleman expressing my sympathies to the families and indeed the firefighter who's currently in hospital. I'm sorry to hear that and wish him a speedy recovery. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of the record of this government is supporting the most vulnerable in our society. Just this winter, helping all families £900 with their energy bills, raising the national living wage to record levels and ensuring that our pensioners get the support they need. That's what this government is doing to ensure financial security in this country.
I'm not sure what question the Prime Minister thought I asked, but that certainly was not it, Mr. Speaker. But let's be clear about this. This is now a matter of the Prime Minister's own integrity and accountability. After all, when there was questions about The Home Secretary, the Secretary in concerns about her role in relation to national security, he chose to back her. Now the Chair of the Tory party, he's choosing to back him despite a £5 million penalty from HMRC. And of course, he's seeking to protect the former Prime Minister despite his cosy financial relationship with the chair of the BBC. Is it little wonder that people in Scotland may well just consider the Tory party to be a parcel of rogues?
Mr. Speaker, what I'm standing up for is proper due process. That's why we have an independent adviser. It's right that the independent adviser conducts his investigation. That's how we will ensure accountability, and that's what I will deliver.
Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wales has almost 40 times more people than England waiting more than 2 years for NHS treatment, despite having less than 5% of the population. Sad case of devolve and forget, unfortunately, which does a disservice to my constituents in Delyn. Could the Prime Minister confirm that the UK Government remains concerned about the healthcare of the people in Wales? And given that the North Wales Health Board has had it for 8 years, could he come up with a way of putting the Welsh Labour Government into special measures?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman highlights, the NHS right across our union is facing pressure because of some of the challenges of flu and COVID in particular, causing high bed occupancy this winter. We are focused on delivering on the people's priorities and bringing down the backlog. We've currently already eliminated waits of over 2 years, and as the honourable gentleman says, there's more to go. That's why our investment this week into mental health treatment will ensure that we can ease the pressure further in A&E, and I continue to delivering that across the country.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the comments of the Prime Minister in relation to Holocaust Memorial Day? And as we think of the situation in Ukraine, we also extend our best wishes to President Zelensky on his birthday today. Freedom of religion or belief is important in this country. Isabel von Spruce was praying silently outside an abortion clinic in Birmingham when she was arrested and questioned by the police, not about her written or spoken words, but about her thoughts. We value freedom of religion or belief in this country. Will the Prime Minister commit to examine the laws of the United Kingdom to ensure that this country remains a beacon for freedom of religion or belief across the world?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, we believe in freedom of religious expression and belief in this country, but we also are balancing that with the rights of women to seek legal and safe abortions. That is currently being discussed in this Parliament. These matters are always matters of free vote, and I know members will treat them with the sensitivity that they deserve.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Innocent civilians are being murdered in Ukraine on Putin's orders as we speak, and as we see in a warmed House of Commons, families are freezing because their electricity is being cut off by Russian forces. Putin believes that Ukraine is more important to him than the free world and is moving to a full war footing. So the Ukrainians must make gains on the battlefield, and the next 6 months are crucial. They need a full range of weapons, Mr. Speaker, air defence, artillery, longer-range missiles and tanks, and enough to make a real difference. The UK has shown great leadership on this issue. Can I ask, therefore, my right honourable friend to use every means at his disposal, domestic and international, to honour the courage of the people of Ukraine and to defend the whole world order, because ultimately that is what we're really talking about.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've made clear that the UK and our allies must accelerate our efforts to ensure Ukraine wins this war and secures a lasting peace. Last year, the United Kingdom provided £2.3 billion in military aid to Ukraine, the largest package of support of any European nation, and we will at least match that again this year. And as my right honourable friend knows, last week I announced that we would gift many battle tanks as part of the next major package of UK support to Ukraine, and I'm pleased that our friends and allies are preparing to follow our lead.
Dr. Rupa.
Mr. Speaker, London has it all: prime property, shopping, schools, even the perfect time zone for money laundering. And while there has been movement with Russian oligarchs, it's not just them. We know that there are relatives of regimes that we all condemn on both sides of this House that are running bogus Islamic centres just as fronts to stash their dirty cash, amongst other things. So when will the NCA be adequately financed so we can be a world leader in anti-corruption, as we promised in 2016? Or is there a lack of political will to upset the apple cart?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady should know that we're currently in the process of legislating the Economic Crime Bill, which puts in place many more measures to allow us to tackle some of the issues that she raised, and also introduces the Economic Crime Levy, which will provide considerably more funding to tackle economic crime in the UK.
Sir McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Trans-Pennine Rail upgrade is underway, which is good news, with stations in Slough and Marsden getting improvements. But what's not such good news, Mr. Speaker, is the dozens of daily rail service cancellations by Trans-Pennine Express, which is causing absolute misery for my constituents, trying to get to work, trying to get to college, trying to visit family and friends. The franchise is up in May, Mr. Speaker. So does the Prime Minister agree with me? Enough is enough. If Trans-Pennine Express don't get to grips with this, we need to strip them of the franchise and get somebody in who will deliver the reliable rail services for my constituents.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have been clear that the current service is simply not acceptable. Rail North Partnership is working with a company on a service improvement plan, and my honourable friend, the Rail Minister, is having weekly meetings with them. As the honourable gentleman points out, Trans-Pennine Express contract does expire in May, and whilst there are currently discussions about that new contract, if ministers conclude that the operator cannot be turned around, then other decisions may be made.
Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From Rwanda to deaths in the Channel and the latest scandal of missing children, refugees and campaigners have today gathered outside Parliament to highlight the impact of the hostile environment on people in the migration and asylum system. Rather than cruel gimmicks like Rwanda, isn't the best way of deterring channel crossings, saving lives and breaking the business model of criminal gangs to introduce safe and legal routes to claim asylum?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this just is about fairness. It's about fairness for those that seek to come here legally. It's about fairness for those who are here and our ability to integrate and support those who we want to. What we will do is break the cycle of criminal gangs, which are causing untold misery, leading to deaths in the Channel. And that's why we will introduce legislation that makes it clear that if you come here illegally, we will be able to detain you and swiftly remove you to a safe third country. That is the reasonable and common sense approach that the vast majority of the British public supports.
The Prime Minister will be aware of my concern that mental health patients should not be forced into accident and emergency departments when what they really need is specialist care. Can he say more about the extra money that's being made available for urgent mental health care facilities, and also what impact he thinks that will have, first on the treatment of mental health patients, but also on the general situation in A&E departments?
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. People in mental health crisis deserve compassionate care in a safe and appropriate setting, and too often they end up in A&E when they should be receiving specialist treatment elsewhere. This week's announcement is in mental health ambulances, crisis cafes, crisis houses, and mental health urgent treatment centres will make sure that patients do get the vital help they need whilst easing pressures on emergency departments and freeing up staff time. My right honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight this issue. Our announcement this week will make a major difference.
As a trustee of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, this week, I was honoured to hear from Leah Lesser, a Holocaust survivor who came to this country by herself at the age of 8 because her parents believed that the UK was a safe haven for vulnerable children. This week, I also read the government's own statistics, which said that there are 200 asylum-seeking, unaccompanied children who are missing from hotels in the UK. Ministers have admitted that they have no idea about the whereabouts of these children. So could I ask the Prime Minister, does he still think that the UK is a safe haven for vulnerable children?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom has opened up its hearts and homes to hundreds of thousands of people over the last few years, from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Ukraine, from Hong Kong, and provided refuge and sanctuary to many children in that process. But the reports that we have read about are concerning. Local authorities have a statutory duty to protect all children, regardless of where they go missing from. And in that situation, they work closely with the local agencies, including the police, to establish their whereabouts. And that's why it's so important that we end the use of hotels for unaccompanied asylum seekers and reduce pressure on the overall system. That's what our plans will do.
James Duddridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Constituents in Southend and Rochford very much welcome the energy bill support scheme that's helped 99% of households around the United Kingdom with rising fuel prices despite Putin's barbaric war in Ukraine. Can the Prime Minister assure my constituents and indeed this House that he's committed to continue helping with the cost of living, not only this winter, but next winter?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right about this government's commitment to support all families with the cost of living. This winter, around £900 of support. But next year, as the energy price guarantee evolves, it will still be there to support families with around £500 of support. And this comes on top of record increases in the national living wage, worth about £1,600, and supporting our pensioners and the most vulnerable by inflating their benefits and pensions with inflation.
Clive Atherton.
In 2021, the government enabled Yevgeny Prigozhin, former chef to Putin and founder of Wagner, to dodge UK sanctions to pursue a case in London against British journalist Elliot Higgins, who had exposed Prigozhin's link to Wagner. Prigozhin believed that silencing Higgins would get his sanctions lifted. The overriding of UK sanctions was approved by the Treasury when the Prime Minister was Chancellor. Prigozhin's English lawyers wrote that serving notice on Higgins, and I quote, will require Treasury approval. So what values did the Prime Minister apply when he allowed a Putin warlord to use our courts to try to silence a British journalist and undermine UK sanctions?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of our record in leading, actually, when it comes to sanctioning those people connected with the Putin regime. I think at last count we've sanctioned over 1,000 people and frozen tens of billions of pounds of assets. I am aware of the case he's raised. We are looking at it. But there is, as he knows, OFSI, who deal with the licensing situations in these matters. But I'm happy to get back to him on the specific case that he raised.
Nicola Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I echo my right honourable friend's comments on the importance of Holocaust Memorial Day and welcome his renewed commitment today regarding the Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre. Will the Prime Minister join me in encouraging members from across the House to sign the Holocaust Educational Trust Book of Commitment, which will be in Parliament today and tomorrow, pledging to remember the Holocaust, fight anti-Semitism and to support the important work of the Holocaust Educational Trust?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and as I said earlier, we will legislate to help build the Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre next to Parliament to serve as a powerful reminder of the Holocaust, its victims, and where prejudice can lead if unchallenged. I also join her in thanking the Holocaust Educational Trust for their fantastic work, and I join my honourable friend in encouraging all members to sign the Book of Commitment, as I will be doing later today.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A week ago, my constituent, Ali Reza Akbari, was executed by order of the regime in Iran. In the 3 years preceding and the days following his murder, the UK government made little effort to protect the life or protest the death of a British national. Tomorrow, Mr. Akbari's family and I meet the Foreign Office Minister. They want to hear what help the government can offer them at this time of their greatest suffering. Today, this House wants to hear from the Prime Minister what sanction he will impose on the regime beyond the trifling steps taken so far. First and foremost, will he show some courage, follow the lead of the United States and the European Parliament, and prescribe the entire Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organisation?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the regime is prolonging the suffering of the family, and it is sadly typical of their disregard for basic human dignity. I've spoken before about my views in Iran when I was before the Liaison Committee, and Iran must now provide answers about the circumstances of his death and his burial. We have actually pressed the Iranian regime formally through their chargé d'affaires in London and the Foreign Ministry in Tehran, and will continue to do so until the family get the answers they deserve and have sanctioned several members connected with the case.
Redcliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister and the Chancellor for visiting Hindman and Haslingden just last week to hear about the transformative difference that the Levelling Up funding will make. This is a historic investment with over £40 million secured. So does he agree with me that we're delivering on exactly what was promised in 2019 to the areas that were forgotten the most, like Hindman and Haslingden, and will he visit once works are completed to see the difference himself?
Well, my honourable friend is a fantastic champion for her local community, and the result showed when the Chancellor and I were lucky to visit her last week. And as she pointed out, and as did many of the people that we spoke to, this was an area that had been forgotten, neglected for decades, but it's this government that is putting in the investment, spreading opportunity, making jobs, and making sure that people can feel enormously pride of the place that they call home.
Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister realise that most people in my constituency think it's his role to keep our country safe? Yeah. Is he aware that in all those years I've been in Parliament, I have never heard a situation where our army and armed forces are so run down that the chairman of the Defence Select Committee and the Secretary of State for Defence both say our armed forces have been hollowed out and are unfit to put a division into active service? What's he going to do about that?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman seems to forget the fact that we've invested an extra £24 billion in our armed services. It's a record uplift in defence spending, ensures that we are one of the leading spenders on defence in NATO, and we will continue to ensure that we have one of the best equipped fighting forces anywhere in the world. And as we can see by the recent announcement on tanks, we continue to lead the world when it comes to standing up for not just our safety, but the safety of our allies around the world.
Sir Michael Penning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as a former firefighter, the whole House will pray for the firefighter that's fighting for his life in Scotland today. Our emergency services go one way into the danger while we come the other way, and our thoughts and prayers should be with them. On a separate note, Prime Minister, the Cornwall Borough Council, the Conservative-led council in my constituency, have done a fantastic job in building new houses, social housing and council houses. Can the Prime Minister assure me that we're not going to be pushed into green belt any more than we have already, and we can protect the Chilterns in my constituency?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman, and I join him in praising his local council for ensuring that we build homes in the right places and make sure that our young people can fulfil the dream of home ownership. But he's also right to say that this government will always protect our precious green spaces, and the recent changes to our planning reforms will ensure that we can protect the green belt everywhere, and his local community and others will benefit from those protections as we keep our local areas beautiful.
Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. UK and a Changing Europe has reported that at the end of 2022, 60% of voters said their cost of living had increased, and 38% that their personal finances had been negatively affected from not being a member of the European Union. While OBR forecasts a 4% reduction in GDP, only 2/5 of which have already happened. Surely the Prime Minister would agree with me, with the electorate and the experts, that Brexit has only served to exacerbate cost of living and economic challenging facing these islands.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Russia's illegal war in Ukraine and the impact it's had on energy supplies has nothing to do with Brexit, Mr. Speaker. But what we are doing is ensuring that we can support families with those cost of living pressures. That's why we provided £900 of support this winter with energy bills. That's why we're increasing the national living wage to record levels, and we will continue to stand behind Britain's families until we can bring inflation back down to where it belongs.
Virginia Crosby.
Mr. Speaker, I know the Prime Minister will share my concerns at the news this morning that 730 people may lose their jobs at the Two Sisters Chicken Factory in Llangefni, one of the largest employers on Ynys Môn. What support can the government offer to both my constituents who are affected by this devastating news and the wider community at this difficult time?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to hear about the job losses that the Honourable Lady raises. My thoughts are with those affected and their families. I know how distressing that will be for them. I'm pleased to say that DWP has procedures in place to support communities when situations like this arise, and we will work very closely with her to do what we are doing everywhere across the country, and that's provide good, well-paid jobs for everyone, because that is the best way to build a happy and secure life.
Caroline Paris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Exercise is essential for both physical and mental well-being, but with spiral energy costs, many venues, like the Freedom Leisure Centres in my constituency, are struggling to cope. While some sectors will receive extra support, the support and leisure industry will not. If the Prime Minister agrees with me that this sector is vital to the long-term health of our communities, why is his government not providing them with the financial support they need to thrive?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course I agree with the Honourable Lady that exercise and leisure centres are important, and that's why we provided significant support to them during COVID and beyond. And with regard to energy prices now, the Chancellor has set out the new relief scheme that will run after the current one expires. It provides considerable support to all sorts of organisations up and down the country, and I'm sure it will benefit many businesses and organisations in her constituency.
I understand that the case referred to by the Right Honourable Member for Lagan Valley is currently before the courts. It is therefore covered by the House's sub judice resolution and should not be referred to in this House. It is, of course, open to any member to ask I waive the resolution in particular case, but that has not happened in this case, and so therefore should not be discussed at all. I will leave it at that. Right. Sends PMQs before I call the urgent question. Let me Order. A point of order, is it related to the questions we've just had? Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Apologies, I forgot to refer the House to my register of interests for the support I received from the RAMP project and my APPG co-chairship of migration. Apologies.
Thank you. Right, let us move on to the urgent question. David Lammy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Minister if he will make a statement on reports that the UK government assisted the Wagner Group, head Evgeny Prigozhin, in circumventing the UK sanctions regime.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The war in Ukraine, as we all agree, is a barbaric, illegal incursion into a sovereign nation by another. It has resulted in tens of thousands of deaths, mass displacement and an ongoing humanitarian catastrophe. We will always stand up for our friends and allies, and we are proud to have led the world's response in partnership with our allies in supporting Ukraine in their fight against Putin's aggression. We'll deliver tanks to roll back any Russian advance, continue providing aid to help Ukrainians as they defend their homeland, and have unveiled the most stringent sanctions on any country at any time in our history. We want to use economic sanctions to starve Putin's war machine and put direct pressure on every individual involved in the decision to go to war and continue to make war on Ukraine. In response to the question lodged today, it is a long-standing custom that the government does not comment publicly on individual cases. It would not be appropriate to break this custom, even in a case as serious as this, where there is obviously public interest. However, I want to outline how, to date, the general approach taken by the Treasury's Office of Financial Sanctions Implementation, called OFSI, Mr. Speaker, in cases where persons designated under sanctions seek licences for legal fees. and how that has been followed for strong constitutional reasons. Within the sanctions regime broadly, because everyone has a right to legal representation, it is possible for frozen assets to be used to pay for that legal representation. The Office grant licences to allow sanctioned people to cover their own legal fees, provided that the costs are reasonable. To be absolutely clear, decisions on the issuance of licences for legal fees are largely taken by Office officials in line with standard practice. The principles and guidance for assessing these applications are long-standing and have been published for a number of years. Applications are assessed solely on a costs basis, and as a country with checks and balances, it is right that the relevant court should decide the outcome of the substantive merits of a case rather than the government. However, I can confirm, in light of recent cases and related to this question, the Treasury is now considering whether this approach is the right one, and if changes can be made without the Treasury assuming unacceptable legal risk and ensuring that we adhere to the rule of law. In advance of that, I know this entire House shares the same goal, to support Ukraine and see all of those behind the invasion punished for their complicity, and the government will continue to take a hard line on all those responsible.
Mr. Speaker, I think the whole House will be shocked at the evasiveness that we just saw from this minister, given the seriousness of this case. Mr. Speaker, for years, the Labour Party has been calling for the government to clean up London laundromat effectively and stop London homes being used as bitcoins for kleptocrats. For months, the opposition has stood shoulder to shoulder with the Foreign Office in coordinating sanctions against Putin and his inner circle. But yesterday, we found out that the Treasury, then under the leadership of the current Prime Minister, issued special licences that allowed Evgeny Prigozhin to circumvent sanctions issued before Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. The government appears to have granted a waiver for a warlord that enabled him to launch a legal attack on a British journalist. This is a perfect example of a slap lawsuit designed to silence critics through financial intimidation. Prigozhin is one of the most dangerous and notorious members of Putin's inner circle. The Wagner Group, which he leads, is responsible for appalling atrocities in Ukraine and around the world. If the now Prime Minister's Treasury had any hand in alleviating pressure on Prigozhin, I'm sure every member across this House would agree that this would be absolutely unconscionable. So I asked the Minister, and I asked him to answer these questions for the whole House. Did a Minister authorise the granting of a licence or exemption to Prigozhin? When did ministers become aware of this incident, and what actions have they taken? Will he commit today to an independent investigation of this controversy? Will he commit to